Hello, this is Deborah Anderson, the Black Woman Animator, coming back to you with another video. And in this video, I have Carrie Hawks. Welcome.
Hi.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Carrie Hawks. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm an animator and currently living in Brooklyn.
All right. So, you were born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. How was it growing up, and what is your origin story?
Growing up in Missouri is, had some highlights, had some difficulties. Kansas City is a metropolis. It is a big city, especially for a lot of cities surrounding that area. So it's, I think the most common confusion is there's two Kansas cities. There's Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. Janelle Monáe is from Kansas City, Kansas, which is wonderful, but Kansas City, Missouri is better, and that is where I'm from. There's some art museums there. Land is flat. You see for miles. We have all four seasons. I did not consider that the South until I came to New York, and other people consider it the South. We were told growing up that it is the heartland, it is the center of the country, so we are Midwesterners, and that's how I see it. Yeah.
I realize, because I'm from Michigan, so not a lot of people know what the Midwest is. Not a lot of people know Michigan is in the Midwest. It's like nobody paid attention in school.
Yeah.
And then there's this current thing online where people are like, if you look at a map, the Midwest is not in the Midwest. I'm like, it was according to expansion. Nobody paid attention in history either. It was the Midwest at the time. It's a whole thing. So what are some of your best childhood memories?
Best childhood memories. Oh, gosh. I have two brothers. I remember sometimes growing up, we would light things on fire. So I think little G.I. Joes or things like that. Or no one tried this, but one of them went to camp and you can get an aerosol can and a lighter and then try and make a flamethrower. So luckily no one got hurt. Again, don't try it. But I think sometimes things like that are just playing in the rain. Those are some good childhood memories.
What is your cultural makeup? That's not only to say what's your ethnicity, but what is the culture of where you grew up and the uniqueness of where you're from?
So my father is from Michigan, his family's from Michigan, so he's the North, and my mom is from Pensacola, Florida, so she's from the South, and they met in the Midwest, so it's a mix of those. My father's family is definitely a little more quieter and reserved, and my mother's family is more talkative, so that can be them as individuals, but also I think there's part of that regional flair in there, and having lived in the North and the South proper now, I definitely see both of those coming in. Both my parents are Black, but my grandfather at one point did pass for white when he wanted to buy some property. So that's where a lot of my lighter skin complexion comes in. And I was raised religious, do not identify that now. So that I think was a huge part of growing up as well. And I'm the youngest of three kids, so that came with pluses and minuses. But I got my own room, so
that was good.
Yeah.
In my instance, I had to share a room with my brothers, but I got the top bunk and they had the bottom bunk.
Oh, okay.
My own bed. So, what would you say was your journey in art and animation in your childhood?
In my childhood, I liked to draw a lot. I really loved art class. I went to public school up till 6th grade, and we had art maybe once or twice a week, and it was always my favorite. I remember I was made a little tree once, and we were cutting it out, and I just kept cutting and cutting to make it really teeny leaves to make it really detailed. So I drew a lot from pictures or sometimes from real life, and then when I got to middle school, my teachers encouraged me to draw more from real life, so I'd do still lifes of my teddy bears or different things like that. I remember Janet Jackson had some album, and I remember drawing her off the album. Or I had that book, How to Draw Horses.
Yeah.
So I drew horses. So I always knew I enjoyed drawing art. I didn't really think about animation until I was in college. I just didn't know how that worked or how to make it, how to do it, or where to find out more. I was also born before the internet, or before it became popular. So if I didn't know anybody doing it, then I didn't have an idea. I didn't find out more. But yeah, I kept doing visual art. I actually was writing a lot in in high school. I won like a poetry award in high school, and I went to college thinking I was going to be an English major and I was going to do writing. And then I started off in that, and then I think it was probably a printmaking class I got into, and then I switched to visual arts from there. But I still didn't even, I think the first time around in college, I went to college twice. The first time around, I don't think I made any animation. It was mostly printmaking and drawing and maybe some dolls.
Mm-hmm. You're saying that you didn't get into the arts until college, like as pursuing. So, were your parents supportive of your artistic interests?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was in high school, I remember my mom wanted me to learn how to play piano, and I did not. So I bought a guitar, and I took maybe a few guitar lessons, but I wasn't really into it. And then I told her, I was like, but they have this watercolor class at the Nelson Atkins Museum, which is a big museum in Kansas City. So then they did enroll me in the watercolor class, and that was cool. And so I was doing more drawing and painting. And they were always supportive of that. My grandmother on my father's side was an artist as well until she went blind. So there's a lot of like drawings that she did and watercolors that she did. So they were definitely supportive.
Yeah. So some projects that you've worked on, Black Enough, Origin of Hair, Inner Wound Real. Do you have any other projects that you worked on that you want to mention?
Yeah, those three. I have a very short called Negro Hair Petting Zoo. I also have, there's other ones. Why am I blanking on my own art? I did graphic design for a while, so I worked for Bustle, and I made a piece called Trump's Impact on Women, or something like that. It was about the Trump's policies and how it would impact women around the world. I also did I worked for Doctors Without Borders, and I did some animation and drawing under the camera, kind of in the style of Molly Crabapple, about immigration. I've also animated and done motion graphics for other people's films. There's a film called Willie about the first Black NHL National Hockey League player. And then some graphics for a film called The Feeling of Being Watched about CIA surveillance of a Muslim neighborhood outside Chicago. So I got to actually animate some of Molly Crabapple's drawings, which was really cool for me. And yeah, I've done other animated films, and then I made a live action short documentary for Art 21 about the artist Camila Janan Rashid. And I'm currently working on another personal animation project.
So what are you typically trying to say in your personal work?
In my personal work, I like to, I think about it as work that's healing. So whether it's getting in touch with my own insecurities, I've touched on my insecurities like racial insecurities or gender insecurities or sexuality. Also talked about self-injury and self-harm, because that's something I used to deal with and other people do too. And I was trying to eliminate stigma around that. Also talking about people trying to touch my hair and feeling I'm treating me like I'm an exotic object more so than a person. And lately I've gotten into comedy, so I see comedy also as healing. So I'll talk about that sometimes in my comedy. And I am now working on my first feature script animation about a vampire snail fighting climate change, because I love snails. It involves a vampire bat as well, so I'm learning a lot about bats and snails and having a lot of fun researching.
You taught English in Japan. Did you have any issues with people trying to touch your hair over there? Or how was your experience in Japan?
I would say overall it was a pleasant experience.
How
And just 1 year.
Okay.
And there was one time I went to some kind of event, and I was just walking by, and someone literally put her hand out, grabbed my hair, yanked my head back because she wanted to touch it, and I was like, no. That was a definite low point. But I had other co-teachers who were wonderful, and like we would talk about things, and they were very curious, but they were also very respectful. I took a hip hop dance class there, and everyone, I mean, I am a good dancer, but before I did anything, everyone's like, oh, you're so good. And I'm like, I just walked into the room, like nothing else happened, because there's like huge love of hip hop culture there, and now like so many amazing hip hop dancers, b-boys, b-girls. Like a lot of my students are like, I'm a b-boy. I'm like, okay, and this was one, but I mean, Japan is doing great in dancing and reggae and dancehall and all that. So, yeah, I was definitely very, very much an outsider. I do remember one time I was walking around and someone saw another Black person and was like, oh, do you know him? And I'm like, no. We don't actually all know each other. But yeah, I'd say there was a lot of positive stereotypes about Black people there, which is refreshing in a way versus having only negative stereotypes.
Yeah. I taught English in Korea, and when I first went, because I went in 2009, and so when I first went, they would have the listings of like whites only, and then they, I think they got experience with Black people, and then because sometimes the white teachers phoned it in, and so because of the hard work of the Black people, they're like, it switched to like Blacks only.
Wow.
Not everywhere, but like some schools will be like Blacks only.
Wow.
Stereotype.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And we put in a little bit more work than the other people.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I had friends who taught English in Korea, but I haven't made it there yet.
Yeah, luckily I never had anybody like touch my hair. Well, there was one time like I let it happen because there was one class where like I typically taught each class. I taught at all girls middle school and all girls high school, and so I typically taught each week. But there was like one particular class I think at the middle school where I just saw them like every 2 weeks or 3 weeks for some reason, and so I kind of felt bad that I wasn't like giving them a time. And so this one girl like asked to touch me, and I had a big afro at the time, so I was just like, okay, but typically I'm like, nah.
Yeah, same. When I had like a couple co-teachers and we known each other for a few months, and they were very, and they're like, can I? And I'm like, okay. Yeah, they were being very respectful and kind, and I was like, this is truly, they're asking out of ignorance, and I am an educator right now, but it was not like a common habit.
Yeah, and I kind of feel a way about the people, because also, as an introvert, that's what I was there for 2 years, but I just got tired of people staring at me, so I came home, and people will be like, "Oh, just pretend you're on the runway," and I'm like, "I would never on the runway. Like, so why would I do that?" But I feel the way about the people who kind of like make their content over like being a spectacle of sorts. It's just, you're like setting a bad precedent. Like, it's cool for you, but
other people don't want to.
Yeah, so then they're gonna think that they can do that with anybody, and it's like,
yeah. There was one time I was hanging out with a Japanese friend, and they were like, well, how do you handle all these people staring at you right now? And I looked around and I was like, they're not. And he's like, no, they are. But just in a very, like, not in a blatant way. But, I mean, it happened definitely in China, but that was very blatant.
Yeah.
And we were in small towns.
I hear like there's level. It's like Japan is the best, and then Korea, and then China's like they're gonna go crazy.
Yeah, I was in a few, like, asked to be in a few pictures. Like, okay.
So, what would you say you love about animation?
There's a lot. I think one, like, anything, you can make anything happen. I think, and it's, I mean, technically, I guess you could do that in live action film, but the leap doesn't seem that far in animation, and we're already used to things that don't happen in real life happening in animation. I also love that it can like provide anonymity and safety. I love how you can just time travel, like physics. You can just make up the whole world, and then people will just believe it if as long as it's consistent. I love that it's magical. I love that you can do it. I teach animation now, and I'm always like, you don't have to draw to animate. You can animate with like dirt on the ground.
Yeah.
You can animate with almost anything. There's so many different kinds of animation. That is also, there's animation for every taste, every like level, every, like, if you want it for little kids and preschoolers, if you want it for adults and really difficult and strange, like there's just so much you can do with it. And it's like a keyword that I'm just kind of like piqued up interest anytime someone mentions it. And even if it's animation that I'm not particularly into, there's usually something I respect and admire about the craft of how it was made.
Yeah. And I feel like on the flip side, I think I saw an interview with you. I think you were talking about Black Enough, where that person was asking you like why you didn't do it as a narrative, and you were talking about deciding to do it as a documentary actually makes it more real. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really wonderful narratives, and there's a lot of great things you can do with that. When I decided to make Black Enough, which is a documentary, at first I was just going to have like live action talking heads, which I didn't find particularly interesting to do. And I think if I did the whole thing that way, it wouldn't have been as engaging to watch. So by making it animation, I can also like take people places that either don't exist, or like show people my emotions on my face, but like turning my face red and like having my eyes bulge or something like that. And that doesn't really work so well in live action. And there's, I don't know, it also, when it like talks about more difficult emotional things, I think it's easier to process and ingest that in an animation than in a live action a lot of times. I got to bring my grandpa back to life, like, things that just I cannot do in live action. So that was really fun. And like make little games out of kind of heavier topics, because it was me talking about my own family. I feel okay poking fun at some things versus if it wasn't live action. Yeah.
I think something cool that you had said was like sometimes when you do narrative, that gives people the agency to think that it's not real, and then it's like
yeah. Definitely. And I mean, I watch a lot of documentary. I love a lot of documentary. And it has a lot in common with narrative films, I think, because like you need to identify with the characters, you need to care about them, you need to see things progress and evolve. But just by knowing that someone's being really honest and vulnerable with you, it's a privilege, and it's also like, I think as a viewer, you feel closer because they're like, oh, they're really putting it out there. And a narrative, like you can have amazing actors who definitely stir up those emotions in you, but knowing that it's real kind of hits different.
What would you say is your superpower? It doesn't have to be animation related, but as a person, what do you feel is like your superpower?
I think partially it's finding things that I like or admire. Yeah, usually in other people. Like there's a lot of people that we may disagree on a lot of things, but I always like to find something that we genuinely share together, and that makes conversations usually easier, or connecting usually easier. And if there's absolutely nothing, that's kind of tricky. But I appreciate being able to do that, and like looking for that, and I try and remain curious about people and situations.
Yeah. So you like Terry Gilliam's Monty Python animations. What was inspirational or intriguing about those animations, and have you used any of that in your own work?
Yeah, well, I watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail, maybe not as much as I've watched Rocky Horror Picture Show, but probably second to that. Like I really loved that movie so much, and I would just like one of the annoying people in high school would quote it sometimes, or just like any line would make me think of it. I love like how silly the violence is and how absurd and funny, and just like I got into watching like their sketch show Flying Circus, and like once they just pretend to be ants, like it's just very ridiculous and silly. And the animation isn't like, I've seen videos now of Terry Gilliam explaining his process, like using the cutouts and using glass and stop motion. And stop motion is like a great entry if people are like, I don't know how to animate, but like you can take like 35 pictures. So I've definitely used like in the film Negro Hair Petting Zoo, that's probably like the closest to Monty Python style, where I'm like making up little voices in my head and kind of making it ridiculous, but then talking about race along with it, because I think that's one thing that Monty Python doesn't exactly, I mean, everything is somewhat about race, but they don't exactly get into it. So I wanted to see them like taking that sentimentality, but then taking it to a message or like a topic that I think could use that. I unfortunately did see some blackface in some Monty Python. That was not wonderful to witness, but it was different. Anyway, not all of it's like that. Yeah. So there's a lot of it that I really, really love to this day. And I think also something about the time period when I was born, it was like made slightly before I was born. And so a lot of times you identify with things that are like, you know, adults maybe were into when you were a kid, and then you're like, oh yeah, that is really funny.
Yeah. What has been your journey with identity?
It's still going. I think I grew up in the Midwest. I am light-skinned. My brothers, one of them is more medium tone. The other one is also like my tone. In Missouri, like I think I talk regular, but I definitely got a lot of like, you talk white or you talk like this. Especially I ended up going on scholarship to a predominantly white institution from 6th grade until 12th grade, and so there was a lot of like class issues there too, or people just, I'd never been that close to people who had that much money.
Yeah.
And they also, some of them were wonderful, but some of them were not, and had stupid ideas about race and gender. And that wasn't nourishing or kind or anything. Like I remember, I don't know, back when people had telephones and talked on the telephones, like we used to do these rate calls where you would call somebody up that you liked and have your friend like use their voice and be like, well, what do you think about this pronoun? So on a scale from 1 to 10. I think someone called up someone I liked, or like didn't even admit that I liked, but I liked, and was like, well, what would you rate Carrie on a scale from 1 to 10? And they were like, oh, I mean, at the time I was a girl, but I'm going to recorrect the gender. They're like, oh yeah, they'd be pretty if they weren't black. And it was like, oh, okay. Like these are people I'm like, a group of 85 people that I went to school with from 6th grade to 12th grade. I'm like, okay, so I thought I was like in, but I was not in. And I mean, that it was hard then. It's not like a great memory, but it's like, okay, at this point, these aren't people I want to be in with. But yeah, so I think I was doing a lot of like self-doubt, like not a lot of self-esteem, not a lot of fitting in, which now I think it's made me more empathetic towards a lot of people, and like also lessened my desire to fit in most of the time. But yeah, it was tricky. I was also trying to figure out what gender I wanted to be, what sexuality I really was. I think I came out as bi, and then I came out kind of as queer, and then I came out as non-binary, and then it just like keeps coming out and all this stuff. So it's evolving, but yeah, I think it's interesting, and I like to explore it in art also, and I like to see people explore it in art, and I think it's a kind way to let people in, and then people can identify with it or learn things, and hopefully not repeat stupid things to people they know. Yeah. If they've seen it in art.
Yeah. So, were you having the ideas about were you having thoughts about gender when you were younger, and how do you feel like the society was then and then society now as far as gender expression and the comfortability?
I mean, I'd say definitely in the U.S. in most places that I live, it has gotten much better. I think probably when I was third grade, I remember having a crush on this girl in my class and like wanting to be really protective of her. And I don't know if I knew that like not straight people existed much. And then I think I saw someone who was, maybe she was a trans woman or a cross-dresser at the time. And I just remember being like fascinated with her and being like, wow, she's gorgeous. What is this? I want to find out more. Yeah. This is like at some fish restaurant. It was like, so I think I had a lot of curiosity and questions. Mm-hmm. And then when I got into high school, like I was somewhat out as bi to some people. In college, I was like, I'm just going to be out because it's New York City. And that did have some backlash, but it was easier. It wasn't easy. And then, I think probably when I was young, I used to think I called it big hand syndrome. I just felt like really awkward. Like I had really big hands and I didn't know what to do. Yeah. And I was like, I'm definitely not a girly girl. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a butch. And my friends are like, no, you're not. I'm like, no, I'm hard. Like, I'm not. I have a range and I'm getting more comfortable just being in my range. And I think there's a long time, like, first I like pink and purple. Then I was like, no, all black all the time. And then now I'm like, no, but purple's cool. Colors are cool. Like, I can like things. People are probably going to misgender me. Okay. But I'm not going to prevent that from me exploring what I want. I don't know if there's background noise. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I think now it's mostly like trying not to let things prevent me from exploring what I want to do. And like on occasions I will wear a dress and I'm just kind of saying to myself, okay, you will get misgendered more so today. I'm like, I know that doesn't change who I am. I'm going to do it. But yeah, it's, it definitely got easier in college and meeting more people, like going to like, there's a bisexual discussion group at my college. There was like there's a group called Labia, Lesbians and Bisexuals in Action at my college. And now that I teach in a college, like I love to see how open and supportive and exploratory so many students are. And like, we're all asking pronouns before class and like, that feels wonderful and great. And that is not how I grew up, but I'm much happier that that's becoming a lot more normal.
Sometimes when I'm watching like LGBTQIA content, there's like a lot of work that has to be done in like decentering the like patriarchy and, you know, misogyny and all type of things like the binary. And so, because I feel like sometimes when you see people talk about trans, it's like there's like this box, whether it's like a stud lesbian if there's this box, or like a lesbian at all, there's this box, and then there's the lipstick lesbian, it's like, oh, you're lesbian. Like I feel like there's, and then with the like non-binary or trans of like there's not one way to do it, and like you then there I feel like there's just so many rules that should not be rules. So, like, what is that experience?
It was funny. I was on one social media platform and a friend started a group like AB Positive Fence Sitting Unicorns, and it was just like, okay, you're queer enough to be here, you're trans enough to be here, you're weird enough to be here. Just like trying to like let go of like the expectation of like, oh, well, if you're non-binary, then you need like there's no, okay, you wear makeup on these days, you don't on these days, you wear skirts on these days. Like it doesn't have to be like that. And just really trying to unlearn a lot of things. I think that is a huge focus for me. And like there's some days I wake up and I'm like, I don't want to be looked at today, I don't want to be talked to today. And that was like many years of my life actually, and I would just wear the biggest, baggiest like a lot of like metal t-shirts, but like, so I would get looked at, but like, I'm like, I'm gonna look like intimidating, so then I don't want to be approached. And now it's not as much like that. And I got lost on your question. I'm sorry.
Oh no, just the rules.
Oh yeah, I don't like the rules. Yeah, but I definitely I feel like that happens a lot, and it's been weird. Like I was at a film festival. It used to be called the North Carolina Gay and Lesbian Film Festival, and I think they changed the name because it was like the community has outgrown that. And I've been in other festivals where it's like, okay, we have a women's short and then we have a men's short, and it's like, couldn't it just be a great short? Could it be a comedy short? Could it be, I think MTV like has awards for like best kiss, best duo, best, and they kind of got rid of the gender parts. So I'm curious to see how that will evolve and be more inclusive. But yeah, I don't think the rules are necessarily helping a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I do see the value in having women-centered spaces.
Yeah.
And like affinity group spaces. Mm-hmm. But letting people self-determine to an extent, like what groups they want to be in or what groups they're allowed to be in is good. But yeah, I think less rules.
Yeah. One thing that's funny about you talk about wearing the like black and like or dark like baggy clothing and like the metal shirts. I just saw like a TikTok where this person was very like metal goth, whatever, like just the makeup and just the like mohawk, and they were like a parent actually like walked up to them because their child was interested, and it was like, now sometimes metal people are seen as safe. So like in a different space you could have been like approached, even though people were like trying to not be approached by people how you dress. But like in certain spaces, like particularly these days, it's like if like the spiky hair people are like, oh, they're not like they're not actually like
yeah.
So that would be funny. Like you're trying to like not be seen, and they're like, oh, you're cool.
Yeah, that would be funny. I mean, also a lot of times it was like, I just don't want men to talk to me. Like not about what they might talk to me about. Like, you want to talk about animation, we can talk. But you want to talk about what's your phone number? I'm like, nah. Okay.
Yes, of course. So you mentioned being a professor. How has your experience teaching been? You did talk a little bit about it, but expand.
Yeah, so I'm kind of new to teaching. I taught one class during lockdown, an experimental animation class at Parsons, and then I later applied, and so now I teach full-time at Parsons, and I'm entering now my third year. The first year was just sheer panic of like, what am I doing here? Because I never formally studied animation, and it took a while to like let go of that. As like, but I'm making animated films, so I'm a real animator, and I can learn any vocabulary. So I think the first year was a lot of like, I was teaching intro to animation. I'd never taken that, so I'm like looking in books and looking at references because I want to give my students the best basis that they can have, and like animating on paper with pencils and like getting a light board and all these things and a pegboard. Like those are things that I was like, okay, as long as I try it a little bit ahead of when I explain it, it's okay. And I think a lot of my coworkers were helpful in thinking like, you're not there to be the expert. You're there to like facilitate good questions, facilitate learning, learn things together. And then another person was like, try and make the classes where the students are doing most of the work. It's not about me coming in and telling them like, this is everything you need to know and this is how you need to do it. But like setting up time and space and like giving them references, giving them tools if they want to find out something, helping them find out. But I don't have to tell them how to do every single thing. So that's been really helpful. And now in my third year, it's like, yes, it's work, but it's not sheer panic because that was just scary. And I think it's really great. Like, it seems like a generational shift that students are really open. They're really supportive about people's identities. They're like, oh, you want to make something about your culture? Like, that's amazing. I want to learn it. And they're open to talking about mental health. They're generally very kind to each other, which is so wonderful to see.
Mm-hmm. I'm teaching at a community college right now, and last summer was my first time teaching at the college. And I remember I teach introduction to 3D modeling in Blender, and then introduction to animation.
I need to take that.
And so, like, I remember the first class was like throwing everything in the kitchen sink at them, and then I'm like, each semester I've been like paring it down and taking out more and being like, okay, it's a beginner class, so they just need to know how to do this by the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like yes, I can expose them to a bunch of different things, but then they won't have a grasp about something in my class. So I'm like, hey, let me dwindle it down to like learning these things.
Yeah. I did take a Blender class. That is the one animation class I took. And I used Blender for a little bit, and then I didn't use it for a good 10 years. And now I'm like, I got into Cinema 4D, and then I'm like, okay, I'll get back into Blender.
Cinema 4D is great.
But yeah, people don't, and it's also school. I think impressing on people like, this is the time to try things. You're not going to figure it out. Everything you do is not like a piece that you're going to show for the rest of your life, but like you're learning.
Yeah.
And it's a great spot to be in.
Yeah, I feel like something that I've learned, mostly because I lived in New Orleans and worked at Turbo Squid, and we had like
cool
advisory board of different companies from across the country. And I remember one guy from the video game industry said like a lot of people who are new to the industry and from being students, they kind of get in their brain, like particularly if they're learning a program, say you go to school and you learn Maya, they're like, oh, I'm a Maya artist. And it's like, no, you're a 3D artist.
3D artist. Mm-hmm.
You know 3D. You can go to another program. You just have to learn how to do what you already know how to do in that program. So that's what I try to teach my students. Like, yes, you're learning Blender, but you're learning 3D, so you can use any program that theoretically, like, well, before Blender 2.8, you could use Blender. Like, it's just like so counterintuitive, but now it's gotten better. But like it has. But like other programs, like you just gotta learn the tools. You just gotta learn what is this named in this program. I feel like that's what, like, particularly where we're using all these apps and programs. Like I feel like that's what any animation, like, just if you use this thing for 2D, you're learning 2D. You're not learning that app. Or if you use this app for stop motion, you're not learning the app for learning stop motion. So
yeah, I think that thinking, like, I went to school for graphic design when I went back the second time, and they were like, we don't really want to focus on teaching you programming. We want you to focus on thinking about design, because anyone can learn a program, but if you don't know fundamentals or thinking about how to operate in this space, then it's just not going, the work's not going to be as good.
Yeah. What would you say most people misunderstand about you as a person?
Sometimes, I think I come off as nice, but I think sometimes people, like, also I learned the last few years that I am autistic, and so, like, right now I have a lot of facial expressions. I used to, like, not have so many and not talk as much, and, like, I still can be, and it's like learning and unlearning. Like, I like to communicate directly, and that does not go over well in some circles. And it's not that I'm, like, rude or mean. It's like I'm communicating directly. So, and then I took some time where I would, like, overcorrect and, like, communicate very indirectly. And I was like, no, this doesn't taste good. Or, like, no, you did too much of this. Like, and it's not that I'm, like, mad at someone. It's just, like, I'm communicating.
That's what made the South horrible. Like, being coy and talking around the point and stuff like that. And it's just like, everything could just be so much more efficient if we just said the real thing. I got called out a few times for being in the South. My friend's like,
oh, you were so rude. That's not, and I'm like, I was just walking, like, I don't, or like, finally understanding when someone was insulting me. It's like sometimes it just goes by and I'm like, what? Oh, okay.
Oh, so, like, I don't know the terms, but there's like the two terms.
Bless your heart?
No, well, yes, in the South. But also in Japanese culture, there's the, like, how you feel and then what you present. I can't remember what the words are, but that's the culture of Japan. And ever since I lived in the South, because, in living in Korea and knowing the culture of some Asians, like, or Asian culture, whatever, and then moving to the South, I'm like, some aspects of Southern hospitality is really similar to Asian culture of like the saving face. Mm-hmm. And the bless your heart thing, I'm like, you're telling somebody that they're stupid.
Yeah.
This way, like, okay, it's like it's like more with honey instead of vinegar, but it's still mean.
Yeah. Once you realize what's happening, yeah.
So I just saw like a lot of similarities between Asian culture and like Southern culture. So you incorporate a lot of your culture and your identity into your projects. What do you think about that in general, like encouraging people to do that with their work?
Yeah, I really like it when people do that. I would say, let's see. Yeah, I think when I made the film Black Enough, like that was really about my identity and accepting myself and trying to figure out what Black identity was and how to fit in it. And now I'm like, okay, like I've made that film, and now I'm interested in like how can I bring and other people bring their identities to something, and it's about more than the identity. Like it's about like, oh, and also you're an investigator, or also you're a chef, or like, and you're fighting ghosts, but like how does your identity show up in that and like change like how someone might talk or dress or present or like react. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in like I think stories that include a lot of different identities and diversity of identities, but not necessarily always focused on like identity is the subject.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of films that I still see and appreciate where identity is the subject, but I'm really big on humor right now. I think the last film I made was the second to last film because I made a live action film, but the last animated documentary I made, it was about self-harm. There was no jokes. And now I'm like, I want jokes. I want a lot of jokes. I want cracking up, like, because I think you can also explore a range of things and have a range of ways that you do it where it's not always serious.
Yeah. I was watching like a clip of like a live action you interviewing people at
Afropunk?
Yes, about Blackness. Yeah. And I was like thinking about the question, and I've been for the past like 4 or 5 years, I've been trying to like not live in proximity to whiteness, which at a very basic level is like the first Black whatever can't exist if we don't care about white people. So like not trying to live for the gays or whatever. And I think with the question of like Black enough, I've been like reading a lot of books and trying to think about particularly Black American culture, and I feel like as a community we think of sometimes we know we affect the world, but I feel like at a very basic level we think of it as so superfluous and like it's like sand going through our hands where it's like not a solid foundation. So that's when you have like on social media these diaspora wars where they're like, you don't know where you're coming from, and I'm like, we have 400 years of culture. There's this thing called ethnogenesis where you've got to create a new culture, and I feel like sometimes with the idea of being Black enough, sometimes it relies on the stereotypes. I have a TikTok video that I did recently where I was just like, when people want to like say the N-word, I'm talking like black people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't sound authentic, and it's like, is that the only way you think of being Black? What about like learning about the Harlem Renaissance or like the
Yeah.
Panthers, or like learning like educational things about being Black as opposed to I need to do this like surface level thing to be Black.
Yeah, and that makes me think of when you asked the earlier question about like growing up in Missouri. I think one reason I left is like I felt like at the time that was the way to be Black in Missouri. There was one way, and I was like, there's got to be more. And I'm not interested in that one because I was also into like metal music, or I guess now called emo music, or just like different things.
Yeah.
And like Jimi Hendrix played guitar, like, but that only gets me so far in conversation. So that's why I left and went to Atlanta, and I was like, okay, there's other ways to be Black.
Yeah.
And like expanding that. And I think one person I interviewed at Afropunk, like I loved his answer. He was like, oh, anything I do is Black. So once I've done it, it's Black now. And I was like, paradigm shift. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And not worrying too much, because also I'm really, I mean, I guess I'm kind of Buddhist, but like a lot of Buddhism spaces can be a lot of white spaces. I was thankfully in a BIPOC Sangha for a long time, but I didn't want it like, okay, there's not a lot of Black people here. I didn't want that to prevent me from learning about Buddhism, which didn't start with white people in the first place. But it's like I went on a bat walk the other day because I'm really into bats, and I show up and there were no other Black people. Maybe there was a BIPOC person, not sure, but I was like, but I really want to learn about bats, so I'm gonna go. And now it's an integrated walk, whatever. And everyone was totally cool, totally chill. Nothing bad happened. But I wouldn't want to prevent me pursuing my interests.
Yeah, I like as we continue that there, because back in maybe the 60s there was multiple ways to be Black, but there was one way to be Black, but kind of like, and now in 2024 there's like so many ways to be Black, but I'm kind of worrying about the community aspect, where like how can we keep our community while also being Black in different ways. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I feel like a parallel sometimes on that with queer culture. Like, if you're in a place where it's really not that safe or welcome to be queer, then, like, people will just, like, have their very tight-knit unit. But when you're in a place where it's like, oh, be queer. Like, I remember once I went to a queer and trans open mic, and my friend's like, oh, you mean the one in Crown Heights? And I was like, no, I mean the one in Bushwick. And there was also one in like different parts of Brooklyn, and it's like there's so many, so then it's so expansive, so then it's like not as a tight-knit thing. And I like that's good, but it also means that it's not a tight-knit thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like how community shows up and where it is and how expansive it is. But
yeah. And I feel like I'm definitely not trying to like police anything of Blackness, but I feel like because of our peculiar situation where I've also tried to live in the idea that that ethnicity is a viable, like Black American culture is a viable culture, and so people have like being Korean or being Nigerian or being Brazilian or something like that, and I feel like being Black American is just so loose, and I'm like, preserve our culture, because also in America, Black American culture becomes American culture, even though a lot of people don't know that the history of like all the things, and it's like even more pervasive with social media, because like people be speaking Ebonics and they'll be like, oh, that's Gen Z slang, or like what?
That I've seen in some students, and I was talking to somebody who had a conversation with a student. It wasn't my student, but they were like trying to explain to the student, like, but you're speaking like a Black like that's where this style of speaking, they're like, no, this is from the internet. I grew up on the internet. It is my culture. And it's like, what has happened? And there's people who like, I listened to a great podcast about swing dancing and somebody, it's a Black person swing dancing, and then they went to like Sweden or somewhere, and people were like really, really, really into swing dancing, which, you know, started from African style dancing and then meld. And what she kind of came away with was like people being cultural ambassadors. Like if you can know the origins of things, respect those origins, learn about it, and you're doing it not in a way to like yeah, well, it used to be like, okay, if a black person makes a record, it wouldn't sell, but if a white person makes the same record, there's like, if you're not like just yanking it, then that's very different, and that feels a little more honorable. Like I went to a blues dancing thing here in New York, and it was mostly white people, and someone explained the origins of blues without referring to black people at all.
Oh no, not.
And it was like, I can't be here anymore. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that is not okay. But if someone, and that's not everybody in blues dancing, but everybody at that night. But if someone not of the black culture learned about it, loved it, wanted to keep doing it, invented blues moves, and still paid respect to where it came from, then cool. But yeah.
I saw a good video recently where it was talking about the different ways white people, like when they kind of get into Asian culture, they're always saying, oh, this is from this is from this place, this is from this place. But when they get into black culture, it's like always like argument about what the origin was. And so they like consume different cultures in different ways where they pay respect to Asian culture, but they don't pay respect to black culture.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Points were made. Have you ever endured any like type of discrimination because of your identity in any way? And in real life?
Yeah. I mean, I was sexually harassed at work. That wasn't great. I was like, my boss at one time had given me like lead of a project, and I was communicating with people about the project, and someone just took me off the emails, even though I had made it. I think that was, I mean, you know, it's always hard to sparse out. Was that because I was presenting as a woman? Was that because I was a black person? Was that because people often think I'm younger than I am, therefore don't show young people respect? Who knows? So that's definitely happened. It's infuriating. I had a student worker when I worked in the library. He was older than me. I was in my mid-20s at the time, but I was his boss, and I would tell him to do things, and he'd be like, I'm like, no, but I'm your boss. Like, I don't want to come in and like, but like, I'm your boss. So yeah, definitely happens.
Yeah, I feel like with my identities, like with being treated for if I'm black or a woman or the age that people think I am rather than the age I actually am, it's just like, I feel like it's pretty 33%, 33%, 33% because like the ageism that I endure for like looking 10 years younger than I am, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm a grown-ass adult.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of people giving me advice for things that I did 15 years ago because I was actually that age 15 years ago.
I tend to avoid getting too much into age specific. And like when I worked at Bustle, it was kind of the reverse because like Bustle was really like young culture, and people were like, "But how old are you?" And I'm like, I like ice cream. Like I just like would avoid because it's like if you're not close enough to like what's going on in IG and what's going on in Twitter, then you can't be good at your job. I'm like, this is boring. So yeah, and my students are like, well, how? I'm like, the most I will give you is I watched Buffy when it was on TV. You can do some math, but leave me alone.
Right. Well, you mentioned like I like ice cream. That reminds me of like, okay, so I went to school in upstate New York, so like I went to school with a bunch of people from New York City, and sometimes they would like try to be in my business, but because they're like so quick-minded, I could just like wait, and then they would like squirrel, and so that got me out of like telling a lot of people my personal business. And then I moved to the South where people actually listen, and I'm like, damn it, like I gotta figure out other ways to like not tell my business. So
yeah. That's right. I was in New Orleans this summer, actually, and I was there with a friend's friend who someone introduced us. We went to karaoke, and my friend like told everyone, he's like, oh, his name was Dutch. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. He's like, yeah, because my mom's Dutch. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then someone we just met was like, and where are you from? And I was like, Missouri. Like, I'm not, like, we just met. I'm not actually interested in, like, no.
Right.
My friend's like, good save. I was like, yeah, I'm not having that conversation right now.
What are 3 movies or TV shows that you recommend to my audience, and why?
Animation, non-animation, anything?
Whatever you feel. However you feel moved.
Well, right now I am watching Scavenger's Reign, which is an animation. It's on HBO. It is really beautiful. It's like these people have landed on this planet, and they're kind of figuring out how the planet works and how the plants there work and how the animals and like things operate in different ways, and it feels like something dark is happening, which leads me to my second recommendation, because it very much reminds me of Fantastic Planet, which is a 1970s French independent animation directed by René Laloux, about this planet where there's like 2 groups of people, the orgs and the drogs, and one of them are like communicate through meditation and their minds, and the other ones are like humans, and they're very small. And I assign it to my class a lot because I think it gets into like difference and power in a way that is like it like there's blue people and white people, so like, but it gets into a lot of things, and like even colonization. I think it really depends on how you interpret it. So those are 2 animations, but I'm also watching the new Interview with a Vampire, the series, which is very gay and very like one of the vampires is Creole, so it's like they bring race into it, and I love the first season. The second season, I do find myself wandering a little bit, but I love how they bring, because I love vampires, so I love how they bring vampirism and thinking about that into like racial dynamics and relationship dynamics. I think it's fascinating.
When I saw you explain, like your love for snails and like their biology and stuff like that, I was like, is there like a connection to your identity and why you like snails, or?
Yeah. I mean, I love snails, and like a lot of snails and slugs have 2 different genders embodied, so they can mate with. Some snails can mate with themselves. Some snails can mate with each other, and then sometimes they're like bring out these love darts to be like, no, you're gonna have the eggs, and you're like, no, you're gonna have the eggs. Or if you see 2 garden snails mating, there's a video of David Attenborough, and it's like beautiful and otherworldly. It looks like a glass sculpture. It's incredible, and like penis just comes out from the head, and like they just this big tundra, like. Who can make up something that amazing? It's really inspiring. So I love that about them. So I definitely feel like that relating to my gender. And a lot of people like will say like homosexuality or transness or something doesn't exist in nature. And it's like, no, nature has so many genders and so many pairings, and like it's all there. Like, quit trying to put your morals on it.
If somebody was producing a documentary about you, what would you want them to highlight outside of your work in like, animation, teaching, stuff like that?
Comedy. I do stand up, so I think I would want to be like, any place that I can perform, I would be like, yeah, you got to put my jokes in it though. So yeah, definitely some jokes and probably something about veganism. I'm a vegan. I am a recovered self-righteous vegan mostly, but Yeah, I think those two. And I have comedy about veganism, so then you could still put in it.
Yeah, I put, like, when I list about, like, the people who are, like, very harsh, like, hard recruiters, vegans are definitely on that. So, and including, and anime people.
I think maybe on, I'm getting into some anime. I'm watching Death Note, like, okay, but, like, yeah. But I recognize, having grown up in a religious household, I recognize some dynamics.
But, like, my list is, like, extreme religious people, extreme atheists, vegans, CrossFit, anime.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to follow you on social media or learn more about you, where can they find you?
Most places I am Maroon Horizon. That's maroon like the peoples or the color, and then the sky like sky. So that's what I am on Instagram, and my website is maroonhorizon.com. I only have looked at TikTok. I have not made any things yet, so that's mostly it. I do exist on Facebook, but I don't really use it much, so I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah.
And then one of my film Inner Wound Reel has its own Instagram, and that's at inner like inside wound like a gash and real like not fake.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you for allowing me to highlight you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was I'm excited when people are like, oh, I want to talk to you, especially like Black animators. I'm like, yes. So yeah, I was really excited that you reached out, and sorry it took me a while to respond to email. Anyone listening, it sometimes takes me a while to respond to email. Yeah, but this is really fun and a great conversation. So so happy to participate.
And to anyone out there, I want you to like So I Know It's Real, comment and tell me how you feel, subscribe to So the Deal, and sign up for post notifications to show your zeal. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace.